The bailiff called my name, and I stood up in that cold courthouse, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, sat across the aisle with her expensive attorney, her designer handbag clutched tight, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the leather. She looked at me with that same contempt I had seen for years, but this time there was something else in her eyes. Fear. She should have been afraid. Can you imagine being accused of kidnapping your own grandchildren after spending 3 months caring for them while their mother partied on luxury yachts? What would you do if the person you trusted with your son's heart turned around and tried to destroy your life with lies? I remained calm in that courtroom, my hand steady on my purse where I kept the evidence that would change everything. Melissa had no idea what was coming. None of them did. My name is Florence Whitfield. I am 62 years old, and I spent 35 years as a family law paralegal before retiring. I know courtrooms, I know the law, and I know exactly what it takes to protect the people I love. For the past 3 months, while Melissa claimed I was holding her children against their will, I was actually doing what she should have been doing all along, being their grandmother, their protector, their voice when no one else would listen. It started in March, on a rainy Thursday morning that I will never forget. My son David called me at 7 in the morning, his voice strained and exhausted. "Mom, I need your help. Melissa is going to the Bahamas with her friends for what she says will be just a week. Can you watch Emma and little James? I have to travel for work, and the nanny quit last month." I could hear the weariness in his voice. My son, once so strong and confident, had been worn down by years of Melissa's demands, her constant criticism, her complete lack of interest in being a mother. "Of course, sweetheart," I told him. "Bring them over whenever you need to." What I didn't know then was that Melissa's 1-week vacation would stretch into 3 months of complete abandonment. 3 months where she would post Instagram photos from different islands, different yachts, different parties, while her 7-year-old daughter Emma asked me every night when Mommy was coming home. 3 months where little James, barely 4 years old, stopped asking about his mother altogether and started calling me Mama Florence instead of Grandma. The children arrived that Thursday evening, with hastily packed suitcases and confused expressions. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one with the missing ear that Melissa always threatened to throw away because it was too shabby for photographs. James held my hand so tight I could feel his little fingers trembling. "Daddy said we're having a sleepover with you, Grandma," Emma whispered as I helped her hang up her few dresses in my guest room. But he looked sad when he said it. I smoothed her hair, the same dark brown as my son's, and managed a smile. "We're going to have the best time, sweetheart. Tomorrow we'll make pancakes for breakfast, the kind with chocolate chips that Mommy says are too messy." That first week passed quickly. David called every day, checking on the children, promising he would be back soon. Melissa called exactly twice, once to complain that Emma had chocolate on her dress in a photo I sent, and once to ask if I could wire her money because her credit card was having issues in Nassau. I should have known then what she was planning. I should have realized that her sudden concern about her image and her constant requests for money were building towards something bigger. But I was focused on Emma, who had started having nightmares about monsters coming to take her away, and James, who had developed a stutter that appeared whenever anyone mentioned his mother. The second week became a month. Melissa's calls stopped altogether, but her social media presence exploded. Photos of her in designer bikinis on private yachts, videos of her dancing at exclusive beach clubs, pictures of her with different men whose faces were conveniently cropped out, and always, always, the hashtags about living my best life and finding myself. Meanwhile, I was finding myself too, finding the grandmother I had always wanted to be but never had the chance. Emma and I started a garden in my backyard. We planted tomatoes and sunflowers and herbs that filled the air with the smell of growing things. James learned to ride the bicycle I bought him, his laughter echoing through my quiet neighborhood as he pedaled up and down the sidewalk with training wheels that we promised would come off soon. I enrolled them in the local elementary school and preschool programs. I attended Emma's school play, where she played a singing tree and forgot half her lines, but beamed with pride when she saw me in the audience. I sat through James's first soccer practice, cheering from the sidelines as he ran the wrong direction, but scored a goal anyway. These were not the actions of a kidnapper. These were the actions of a grandmother stepping in where a mother should have been. But Melissa saw it differently when she finally decided to return in June, 3 months later, tanned and refreshed and completely oblivious to the damage she had caused. She walked into my house like she owned it, demanding to know why her children were so attached to me and why Emma flinched when she tried to hug her. "You've turned them against me," she accused, standing in my living room in her expensive vacation clothes, her new designer handbag slung over her shoulder. "You've been poisoning their minds." I watched her carefully, this woman who had given my son 2 beautiful children and then treated them like accessories she could pick up and put down at will. "I've been loving them," I said simply. "Something you might try sometime." Her face flushed red with anger. "How dare you judge me? I'm their mother. I have rights. I was dealing with important personal matters." "Personal matters that involved yacht parties and strange men?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Personal matters that were more important than your children asking when you were coming home?" That's when she made the threat that would change everything. "If you don't stop interfering in my family, Florence, you're going to regret it. I know lawyers too, better lawyers than you've ever seen." I stood up from my chair, all 5 feet and 3 inches of me, and looked directly into her eyes. "Melissa, I was handling family law cases before you were born. If you want to threaten me, you better be very sure you can back it up." She left that day in a fury, taking the children with her despite Emma's tears and James's confused protests. But she had made a fatal mistake. She had threatened me, and threats require responses. I had spent 3 decades learning how to protect families from people exactly like her. The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. The phone rang exactly at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee and trying not to think about Emma's tear-stained face when Melissa dragged her away the day before. I had been expecting this call, but my heart still jumped when I heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Marcus Rivera from Rivera Investigations. We spoke last week about your situation." Marcus Rivera was not what most people would expect from a private investigator. He was a former family court social worker who had grown tired of seeing children caught in the crossfire of bitter custody battles. His specialty was documenting parental fitness, or, in this case, the complete lack of it. I had worked with him on several cases during my paralegal career, and I knew he was thorough, discreet, and absolutely relentless when children's welfare was at stake. "What did you find, Marcus?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Mrs. Whitfield, I've been investigating for 6 days now, and what I've discovered is worse than what you told me. Much worse." His voice carried that grim tone I remembered from the most difficult cases. "Your daughter-in-law didn't just abandon those children for 3 months of partying. She's been building a case against you." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "She hired her own investigator 3 weeks ago, someone who specializes in elder abuse and grandparent interference cases. She's been documenting everything, your grocery trips with the children, their school enrollment, even the bicycle you bought for James. She's spinning it as evidence that you manipulated the situation to steal her children." The magnitude of her planning hit me like a physical blow. While I had been helping Emma with her homework and teaching James to tie his shoes, Melissa had been constructing a legal trap designed to destroy me. "She planned this from the beginning," I whispered, more to myself than to Marcus. "It gets worse, Florence. I followed her activities in the Bahamas, just like you asked. The yacht parties, the expensive dinners, the luxury shopping sprees. None of it was paid for with her own money or your son's money. She's been funded by someone else. Someone with very deep pockets and very specific interests." "What kind of interests?" Marcus paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "The kind that involve wealthy, older men who like to be seen with beautiful young mothers. The kind who don't ask too many questions about where those children are while they're enjoying their companionship. I have photographs, Mrs. Whitfield, dozens of them, and video footage that would make your son sick to his stomach." I set my coffee down with shaking hands. In my years working family law, I had seen manipulation, neglect, and calculated cruelty. But this felt different. This was my family. These were my grandchildren being used as pawns in a game I was only beginning to understand. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "She's been in contact with a family court judge who owes some significant gambling debts to the same people who funded her vacation. Judge Harold Brennan. Ring any bells? The name hit me like ice water. Judge Brennan had a reputation in family court circles. Not a good one. He was known for making decisions that favored wealthy litigants and for having very flexible interpretations of child welfare standards. If Melissa had somehow gotten her case assigned to his courtroom, she would have a massive advantage. Marcus, I need you to dig deeper. I need everything. Every photo, every video, every financial transaction, every phone call. If she wants to play this game, then we're going to play it better than she ever imagined. Already on it, Mrs. Whitfield. But I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly. She's not just trying to get her children back, she's trying to destroy your reputation and possibly have you arrested. The kidnapping charges she's threatening aren't just about custody. In her version of events, you're a manipulative predator who took advantage of a struggling young mother's temporary absence. I stood up and walked to my living room window, looking out at the small garden where Emma and I had planted our vegetables just 2 weeks earlier. The tomato plants were already showing tiny green buds, and the sunflowers were reaching toward the morning light. In 3 months, I had given those children stability, love, and the kind of childhood memories that last forever. Melissa wanted to turn that into evidence of criminal behavior. Marcus, I have a question for you. In all your years investigating family situations, what's the one thing that judges care about most? The truth, Mrs. Whitfield. But more specifically, the truth about what's best for the children. Everything else is just noise. Then that's what we're going to give them. The truth. All of it. I hung up the phone and immediately called my son. David answered on the second ring, his voice tired and strained. He had been trying to manage his crumbling marriage while maintaining his demanding job, and the stress was showing. Mom, thank God you called. Melissa is saying things about the time the kids spent with you. Crazy things. She's claiming you wouldn't let her talk to them, that you were trying to turn them against her. David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your wife is planning to have me arrested for kidnapping your children. She's already hired lawyers and investigators. This isn't about getting the children back. This is about destroying me. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we had been disconnected. When David finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Mom, that's impossible. I mean, Melissa can be difficult, but she wouldn't. She couldn't. Son, I need you to think back over the past few months. Did Melissa ever ask you how the children were doing? Did she ever request to video chat with them? Did she ever send them gifts or letters or even postcards from her vacation? Another long pause. She said she wanted them to be independent, that too much contact would make them homesick and upset. David, in 3 months, your wife called to speak to her children exactly 4 times. Each call lasted less than 5 minutes, and each time she seemed annoyed when Emma wanted to tell her about school or when James wanted to show her a drawing he had made. I have phone records. I documented everything because I was worried about their emotional state. I could hear him breathing heavily, processing information that was reshaping his understanding of his marriage and his wife. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying that your wife has been playing a long game and we were all pieces on her board. But she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated me. That afternoon, I received the court summons. Melissa was suing for emergency custody of her children and demanding that I be investigated for kidnapping, elder abuse of the children, and alienation of parental affection. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and Judge Harold Brennan was indeed presiding. I smiled as I read the documents. Melissa thought she held all the cards, but she had no idea what I had been learning in the past 6 days. She had no idea about Marcus Rivera's investigation, about the evidence we were gathering, about the financial records we were tracing, or about the witness statements we were collecting from teachers, neighbors, and even the other parents at James's soccer practice. Most importantly, she had no idea that her own social media posts, the ones she thought painted her as a glamorous woman living her best life, were actually creating a minute-by-minute timeline of child abandonment that would make any judge question her fitness as a mother. I folded the court papers carefully and placed them in the file folder I had started just a week ago. It was already 3 inches thick and growing daily. Melissa wanted a legal battle? She was about to discover that battling someone who had spent 35 years in family court was like bringing a butter knife to a sword fight. The war had officially begun, but she had no idea she was already losing. 3 days after receiving the court summons, I sat in the principal's office at Riverside Elementary School, the same office where I had enrolled Emma just 2 months earlier. Mrs. Patricia Henderson, the principal, had known me for years through various school volunteer activities, and her expression was a mixture of concern and barely contained anger. Mrs. Whitfield, I have to tell you, when that woman came in here yesterday, demanding Emma's records and making accusations about you, it took every ounce of my professional training not to escort her out of the building myself. Mrs. Henderson was a woman who had dedicated 30 years to child welfare through education, and she had seen every type of parent imaginable. She pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on her desk between us. Let me show you what actually happened during the 3 months Emma was in our care, and let you compare that to the story her mother is now trying to tell. She opened the file, revealing dozens of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. When you enrolled Emma in March, she was clearly a child in distress. She had been out of school for 2 weeks, according to her previous school records, because her mother had pulled her out for family reasons without providing any educational alternatives. I remembered that first day I took Emma to school. She had clutched my hand so tightly I could still feel the impression of her small fingers. She was terrified that I would leave her there and disappear, just like her mother had done. Emma's first week here, she cried every morning at drop-off and asked repeatedly if you were really coming back to get her. Our school counselor, Mrs. Davis, documented several conversations where Emma expressed fear that adults in her life would abandon her without warning. Mrs. Henderson pulled out a folder of children's artwork. But look at this progression, Florence. This is Emma's emotional journey told through her own drawings. The first drawing showed a little girl standing alone in front of a big house, dark scribbles filling the sky above her. The next drawing, dated just 1 week later, showed the same little girl. But now she was holding hands with an older woman in a garden filled with bright flowers. By the final drawing, dated just 2 weeks ago, Emma had drawn herself, me, and James sitting around a dinner table, all of us smiling, with a cat that looked suspiciously like my neighbor's Tabby, who had become the children's unofficial pet. Mrs. Whitfield, in 30 years of education, I have never seen a child's emotional state improve as dramatically as Emma's did under your care. She went from being a frightened, anxious child who couldn't focus on her schoolwork to being one of our most engaged students. She pulled out Emma's academic records. Her grades improved from mostly D's and F's to A's and B's. Her reading level jumped by 2 full grades in just 8 weeks. She started participating in class discussions, joined the school choir, and even signed up for the summer reading program. What about James? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be equally compelling. James's preschool teacher, Miss Rodriguez, wants to speak with you directly. That little boy transformed from a nonverbal, withdrawn 4-year-old into a confident child who could write his own name and count to 100. His stutter disappeared completely after the first month with you. Mrs. Henderson closed the file and looked at me directly. Florence, yesterday, Melissa Walker came in here with her attorney and demanded that we provide statements about Emma's declining welfare under your care. When we showed them these same records, the attorney actually asked us to focus on any signs of manipulation or inappropriate attachment. What did you tell them? I told them that if caring for a child's emotional, educational, and physical needs constitutes manipulation, then every good parent and grandparent in America should be so accused. I also told them that our school would be happy to provide character testimony about your fitness as a caregiver, should it be needed in court. I felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who understood that child welfare wasn't about legal technicalities or parental rights. It was about what actually happened to children in real life, day by day, moment by moment. There's something else, Florence, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Melissa's attorney asked specifically about your financial situation and whether you had been spending unusual amounts on the children. They seemed particularly interested in the bicycle, the school supplies, and the clothes you bought. This confirmed what Marcus Rivera had already discovered. Melissa wasn't just building a kidnapping case. She was constructing a narrative where every act of grandmother love could be reinterpreted as evidence of manipulation and overreach. They want to make it seem like I was trying to buy the children's affection, I said. Exactly. But here's what they don't understand, Florence. Children can't be bought. Love can't be faked for 3 months straight. Emma and James didn't improve because you spent money on them. They improved because, for the first time in their lives, they had consistent, reliable, unconditional care from someone who put their needs first. I left the school with copies of all the records, but more importantly, I left with the confirmation that my instincts had been right. The truth was on my side, documented in children's drawings, academic progress reports, and the observations of trained professionals who spent their lives understanding child welfare. That evening, Marcus Rivera called with an update that sent chills down my spine. "Florence, I've been tracking Melissa's financial activities during her 3-month vacation, and I need to prepare you for what we're dealing with. The total cost of her Bahamas adventure was over $80,000. Your son's credit cards were maxed out in the first 2 weeks, and after that, every expense was covered by wire transfers from a shell company based in the Cayman Islands." "What kind of shell company?" "The kind that wealthy men use when they don't want their wives or business partners to know how they're spending their money. I've traced the ownership through 3 layers of legal protection, but I'm confident I can connect it to a man named Richard Ashworth. He's 68 years old, married, worth about $50 million, and has a very specific pattern of befriending young mothers who are willing to be discreet about their arrangements." The picture was becoming clearer and uglier. So while I was helping Emma with her homework and teaching James to ride a bicycle, Melissa was essentially working as an escort for a married millionaire. That's exactly what she was doing, Florence. But here's the really disturbing part. Richard Ashworth has been married for 42 years to a woman who comes from old money, the kind of family that would cut him off completely if they discovered his extracurricular activities. He needs Melissa to appear to be exactly what she's claiming to be, a devoted mother who was temporarily separated from her children due to circumstances beyond her control. And if it comes out in court that she abandoned her children to work as his companion, his marriage ends, his access to his wife's family fortune ends, and Melissa loses her golden goose. They both have enormous incentives to make sure you're discredited and silenced before you can tell the real story. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the life I had built with Emma and James during those 3 months. Their drawings were still on my refrigerator. James's first attempts at writing his name were taped to the cabinet. Emma's reading certificates from school were proudly displayed on the counter. These weren't the artifacts of kidnapping or manipulation. These were the treasures of childhood, the normal, beautiful debris of daily love between a grandmother and her grandchildren. But Melissa and her wealthy benefactor were about to invest significant money and legal firepower into convincing a corrupt judge that love looked like a crime. "Marcus, I need you to keep digging. I want everything on Richard Ashworth, everything on Judge Brennan, and everything on the connection between them. If they want to play this game at the highest level, then we're going to beat them at their own game. Florence, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you prepared for how dirty this is going to get? Because they're going to attack everything about you. Your age, your interference in your son's marriage, your motivations for caring for the grandchildren. They're going to try to make you look like a lonely old woman who overstepped her boundaries." I thought about Emma's laughter echoing through my house during those precious months. I thought about James learning to ride his bicycle, his face glowing with pride when the training wheels finally came off. I thought about bedtime stories and morning pancakes and all the small, perfect moments that had filled my life with purpose and joy. Marcus, they can attack me all they want, but they made one fatal error in their calculations. What's that? They forgot that I'm not just a grandmother protecting her family. I'm a woman who spent 35 years in family court watching judges, lawyers, and social workers determine the fate of children. I know how the system works, I know its weaknesses, and I know exactly how to present evidence that no judge, corrupt or honest, can ignore. What do you mean? I mean that next week in that courtroom, Melissa is going to discover that she didn't just pick a fight with Florence Whitfield, retired paralegal and loving grandmother. She picked a fight with Florence Whitfield, expert witness in child welfare cases, and the woman who has been documenting every single detail of this situation since the day it started. The battle was about to begin, but I was no longer the underdog. I was the woman with the truth, the evidence, and 35 years of experience in making sure that truth was heard. The call came at 6:30 in the morning on Friday, 4 days before the court hearing. Marcus Rivera's voice carried an urgency I had never heard before, and I knew immediately that he had discovered something that changed everything. "Florence, you need to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to make you understand why Melissa is so desperate to destroy you and why she's willing to risk everything to keep you quiet." I settled into my kitchen chair, the same chair where I'd helped Emma with her multiplication tables just weeks ago, and prepared myself for news that I suspected would be worse than anything I had imagined. Richard Ashworth didn't just pay for Melissa's vacation, Florence. He's been paying her a monthly salary for over a year, $25,000 a month, transferred to an account in her maiden name that your son knows nothing about. But here's the real problem. The money isn't coming from his personal accounts. Where is it coming from? It's coming from the Ashworth Family Foundation, a charitable organization that's supposed to be funding children's programs, education initiatives, and family welfare services. Melissa has been receiving almost $300,000 in what the IRS would consider fraudulent charitable disbursements. The magnitude of the crime was staggering. "Marcus, are you telling me that she's been stealing money meant for children's charities?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And there's more. Judge Harold Brennan, the judge assigned to your case, his wife sits on the board of the Ashworth Family Foundation. She's been receiving director fees of $50,000 a year for the past 3 years, plus consulting payments that total another $100,000 annually. I felt the blood drain from my face as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about a neglectful mother trying to regain custody of her children. This was about covering up a massive charity fraud scheme that could send multiple people to federal prison. Florence, if this comes out in family court, it doesn't just destroy Melissa's custody case. It brings down Richard Ashworth's entire financial empire, ends his marriage to one of the wealthiest women in the state, ruins Judge Brennan's career, and potentially triggers a federal investigation into charity fraud that could implicate dozens of other people. How much money are we talking about, Marcus? Based on what I've been able to trace so far, at least $12 million over the past 5 years. Money that was supposed to go to programs for disadvantaged children, after-school programs, educational grants for low-income families. Instead, it's been funding luxury vacations, expensive cars, private school tuitions for board members' children, and monthly payments to women like Melissa who provide companionship services to Richard Ashworth. I stood up and walked to my refrigerator, where Emma's latest drawing still hung proudly. She had drawn our family, her, James, me, and even David, standing in front of my house with flowers blooming all around us. At the bottom, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, she had written, "My safe place." The irony was almost unbearable. While Melissa was stealing money meant to help children like Emma, I was actually providing the kind of care and stability that charitable organizations existed to support. Marcus, what happens if we expose this during the custody hearing? That's the question, isn't it? If we present this evidence, we completely destroy their case against you. No judge, not even a corrupt one, can rule in favor of a woman who's been committing federal crimes while abandoning her children. But the moment we introduce this evidence, we're not just fighting a custody battle anymore. We're taking on people with millions of dollars at stake and connections throughout the legal system. I thought about my conversation with David the night before. My son had finally started asking the right questions about his wife's behavior, her unexplained money, her complete lack of interest in their children's daily lives. He was beginning to see what I had recognized months ago, that Melissa viewed Emma and James not as beloved children, but as inconvenient obstacles to the lifestyle she wanted to live. There's something else, Florence. I've been investigating Judge Brennan's recent custody decisions, and there's a clear pattern. In cases where wealthy defendants are involved, particularly cases involving the Ashworth Foundation's legal network, he consistently rules in favor of parents who can afford expensive attorneys, regardless of what's actually best for the children. How many cases? 17 cases in the past 2 years where his decisions directly contradicted child welfare recommendations from court-appointed social workers. Children sent back to homes where abuse was documented. Custody awarded to parents with substance abuse problems. Visitation rights granted to individuals who posed clear dangers to child safety. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. Judge Brennan wasn't just corrupt. He was actively participating in a system that put children at risk in exchange for financial benefits to himself and his wife. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Those children, Emma and James, they're not just my grandchildren. They're innocent victims of a criminal conspiracy that's been using them as cover for massive financial crimes. Emma drew me pictures every day during those 3 months we were together. James learned to say, "I love you, Mama Florence," in a voice that didn't stutter, because for the first time in his life he felt safe. I understand, Florence, but you need to understand the risks. If we expose this conspiracy, Melissa and her co-conspirators are going to do everything in their power to discredit you before the evidence can be presented. They're going to attack your mental competency, your motivations, your relationship with your son. They're going to paint you as a delusional old woman who fabricated an elaborate conspiracy theory to justify kidnapping your grandchildren. I walked back to my chair and picked up the folder that had been growing thicker every day since this battle began. Inside were school records, medical records, photographs, financial documents, witness statements, and dozens of other pieces of evidence that told the story of 3 months when 2 abandoned children found safety and love with their grandmother. Marcus, let me ask you something. In all your years investigating family situations, what's the one thing that matters most when children's lives are at stake? The truth, Florence. Always the truth. Then that's what we're going to give them. All of it. Every financial transaction, every fraudulent payment, every corrupt decision, every moment that Melissa chose money over her children. We're going to present the complete truth and let Judge Brennan decide whether he wants to be remembered as the man who protected a criminal conspiracy or the man who protected 2 innocent children. Florence, you're talking about going to war with people who have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. Are you absolutely sure you want to take this risk? I thought about Emma's first day at my house, how she had followed me from room to room because she was afraid I might disappear like her mother had. I thought about James learning to tie his shoes, his face lighting up with pride when he finally mastered the loops and knots. I thought about bedtime stories and morning pancakes and the sound of children's laughter filling my house with life and purpose. Marcus, those children spent 3 months learning what it feels like to be loved unconditionally by someone who puts their needs first. They learned what it means to have a safe home where adults keep their promises and show up every single day. They learned that they matter, that their feelings are important, that their happiness is worth someone's time and attention. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let a bunch of criminals take that away from them just to cover up their own greed. We're not just fighting for custody, Marcus. We're fighting for the right of children to be protected from the adults who would use them as pawns in criminal enterprises. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from my son David. His voice was strained, but there was a new clarity in it that I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, I've been going through Melissa's financial records, the ones she thought I didn't know about. There are bank accounts I never knew existed, credit cards in her maiden name, investment accounts with balances that don't make any sense based on our family income. What are you going to do, David?" "I'm going to testify for you on Monday, Mom. Whatever Melissa has been doing, whatever games she's been playing, I'm not going to let her destroy you to cover up her own crimes. Emma and James deserve better than this. You deserve better than this." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a surge of hope. My son was finally seeing his wife clearly, and he was choosing to protect his children and his mother rather than enable the woman who had been deceiving all of us. The battle was 4 days away, but I was no longer fighting alone. Sunday evening, 24 hours before the court hearing, I sat in my living room reviewing the mountain of evidence we had assembled when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number, but when I answered, I heard Emma's small, frightened voice on the other end. "Grandma Florence? Mommy is yelling at Daddy again, and she said bad words about you. She said she's going to make sure we never see you again, and that you're a bad person who steals children." My heart broke, hearing the confusion and fear in my granddaughter's voice. "Sweetheart, where are you right now? Are you safe?" "I'm hiding in my closet with James. Daddy told us to go to our room, but they're being so loud. Mommy threw something, and it made a crash sound." Through the phone, I could hear raised voices in the background and what sounded like Melissa screaming accusations at my son. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. James's small voice crying and calling for Mama Florence. Emma, honey, I want you to keep this phone call secret, okay? Can you do that for Grandma? Yes, Grandma Florence. I need you to know that everything Mommy said about me is not true. I love you and James more than anything in the world, and I would never do anything to hurt you. Tomorrow, some adults are going to talk about where you and James should live, and I want you to remember that no matter what happens, Grandma Florence will always love you. After I hung up with Emma, I immediately called Marcus Rivera. Marcus, I need you to come over right now. Something is happening at David's house, and I think Melissa might be having some kind of breakdown. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later with news that confirmed my worst fears. Florence, I've been monitoring the situation at your son's house with some very sophisticated equipment. What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to hear, but it's also going to be the evidence that wins your case tomorrow. He pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on my coffee table. For the past week, I've had listening devices planted in your son's house, completely legally, with his written permission as a co-owner of the property. What you're about to hear is a conversation between Melissa and someone she called tonight, recorded just 2 hours ago. He pressed play, and Melissa's voice filled my living room, clear and unmistakable. Richard, the hearing is tomorrow, and that bitch has more evidence than we thought. Her investigator has been digging into everything, the foundation money, the Brennan connection, all of it. A man's voice responded, older and refined, clearly Richard Ashworth. Melissa, you need to calm down. Judge Brennan assures me that he can control the situation, regardless of what evidence is presented. The important thing is that you maintain your story about the kidnapping and make sure those children don't say anything that contradicts the narrative. That's just it, Richard. Emma has been asking about Florence constantly. And yesterday, James had a complete meltdown when I told him he was never going to see his grandmother again. They're not acting like children who were kidnapped. They're acting like children who were rescued. Then make them understand the consequences of not cooperating. Children are remarkably adaptable when they understand what's at stake. Marcus paused the recording and looked at me with an expression of barely controlled anger. Florence, what you just heard constitutes conspiracy to obstruct justice and conspiracy to commit perjury. But there's more. He resumed the recording, and Richard Ashworth's voice continued. Melissa, if this case goes badly tomorrow, if that old woman's evidence creates problems for the foundation, then we need to be prepared to take more drastic measures. What kind of measures? The kind that ensure Florence Whitfield is no longer in a position to threaten our arrangement. I have contacts who can arrange for her to have some very serious legal problems that would make her allegations look like the desperate fantasies of a woman facing criminal charges herself. My hands began to shake as I realized they were discussing framing me for crimes I hadn't committed. These people weren't just willing to steal money from children's charities and abuse the court system. They were prepared to destroy an innocent person's life to protect their criminal enterprise. There's more, Florence. Keep listening. Melissa's voice returned, and this time there was a cold calculation in it that chilled me to the bone. What about David? He's starting to ask too many questions, and yesterday he said he might testify for his mother. Your husband is a problem that needs to be solved permanently. A man who can't control his own mother and who threatens to expose his wife's business arrangements is a man who has outlived his usefulness. Are you saying what I think you're saying, Richard? I'm saying that widowed mothers have much stronger custody cases than divorced mothers, especially when they can demonstrate that their late husband's family was hostile and interfering. Insurance money and sympathy from judges go a long way toward ensuring that children end up with the parent who can provide them with the most stability. Marcus stopped the recording, and we sat in stunned silence for several moments. They weren't just planning to destroy me legally. They were discussing murdering my son to strengthen Melissa's custody case. Marcus, please tell me you've shared this recording with law enforcement. Florence, I contacted the FBI as soon as I heard this conversation. They're opening a federal investigation into the Ashworth Foundation, and they've assigned protective details to both you and David. But here's the complicated part. They can't move to arrest anyone until after tomorrow's hearing, because doing so would compromise their larger investigation into the charity fraud. So tomorrow, I have to walk into a courtroom knowing that the people I'm fighting want to kill my son and frame me for crimes I didn't commit? Yes, but you also walk in knowing that every word they say, every lie they tell, Every corrupt decision Judge Brennan makes is being recorded by federal agents who are building a case that will put all of them in prison for decades. I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the small garden where Emma and I had planted vegetables together. In the growing darkness, I could just make out the shapes of the tomato plants and sunflowers that had become symbols of hope during those 3 precious months with my grandchildren. Marcus, there's something I haven't told you about those 3 months with Emma and James. Something that might be the most important evidence we have. What is it, Florence? I walked to my bedroom and returned with a small digital camera, the kind I had used to document the children's progress for my son. Every day, I took photographs and videos of the children, not for any legal purpose, but because I wanted David to see how they were growing and learning. I documented their meals, their homework, their playtime, their bedtime routines, their doctor visits, their school activities, everything. I handed Marcus the camera. 3 months of daily life with Emma and James. Hundreds of photos and hours of video showing exactly what their lives were like under my care. No staging, no preparation, just the real, unfiltered truth of 2 children being loved and cared for by their grandmother. Marcus began scrolling through the images, and I watched his expression change as he realized what he was seeing. Florence, this is incredible. You have documented proof of everything: the children's emotional state, their physical health, their educational progress, their happiness. This isn't just evidence of good caregiving. This is a complete record of child rehabilitation. And tomorrow, when Melissa tries to convince Judge Brennan that I kidnapped and manipulated her children, we're going to show him exactly what kidnapping looks like in my world. It looks like a 7-year-old girl learning to read chapter books and a 4-year-old boy learning to write his name. It looks like children who sleep peacefully through the night because they know the adults in their lives will be there when they wake up. Marcus smiled for the first time since this investigation began. Florence, I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I have never seen a case where the truth was so clearly documented and the lies were so thoroughly exposed. Tomorrow, regardless of Judge Brennan's corruption, regardless of Melissa's performance, regardless of their expensive attorneys, the evidence is going to speak for itself. And if they try to retaliate afterward, then they'll be doing it from federal prison cells because the FBI will arrest all of them the moment court adjourns. This ends tomorrow, Florence, all of it. I spent that final evening looking through the photographs and videos I had taken during those 3 months with Emma and James. There was Emma's first successful bicycle ride without training wheels. There was James's proud presentation of a crayon drawing he had made for me. There were dozens of images of ordinary moments, breakfast conversations, bedtime stories, homework sessions, playground visits, that captured the daily reality of a grandmother's love. These weren't the artifacts of kidnapping. These were the treasures of childhood, preserved by someone who understood that love was measured not in grand gestures, but in consistent, daily acts of care and attention. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, the truth would finally have its day. At 5:30 Monday morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying lipstick with hands steadier than they had been in weeks. Today was the day Melissa would discover what happens when you underestimate a woman who has spent 35 years preparing for moments exactly like this one. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Rivera. FBI surveillance confirms all parties are proceeding as planned. Richard Ashworth flew in last night. Judge Brennan had dinner with Mrs. Ashworth yesterday evening. They have no idea what's waiting for them. I smiled at my reflection. Let them think they held all the cards. At 7 o'clock, David called. Mom, I've been up all night thinking about what I'm going to say in court today. I keep remembering how happy Emma and James were when I picked them up from your house that first time. Emma ran to show me her garden, and James couldn't stop talking about the bicycle you bought him. They looked alive. I hadn't seen them look alive in months before that. David, just tell the truth. That's all we've ever needed to do. At 8:30, I arrived at the courthouse carrying a single briefcase containing 3 months of love reduced to legal evidence. Marcus was waiting for me with final updates. Florence, they filed additional motions this morning trying to exclude your financial evidence and your photographs. They're scared, and desperate people make mistakes. Judge Brennan denied most of their motions, probably because denying legitimate evidence would look suspicious to the FBI agents who will be reviewing every decision he makes today. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into that courtroom for the second time in my life as a defendant. But this time, I wasn't the frightened grandmother being ambushed by accusations. I was Florence Whitfield, expert witness in child welfare, armed with the truth and 35 years of experience in making sure justice prevailed. Melissa sat across the aisle in an expensive black suit, her lawyer whispering final instructions in her ear. She looked confident, poised, ready to perform the role of the grieving mother whose children had been stolen by a manipulative mother-in-law. She had no idea that her performance was about to become evidence in a federal criminal investigation. Judge Brennan took the bench, and I studied his face carefully. He looked exactly like what he was, a corrupt man trying to balance conflicting pressures while maintaining the appearance of judicial authority. "This court is now in session in the matter of Walker versus Whitfield," he announced. "We are here to determine the emergency custody petition filed by Mrs. Melissa Walker regarding her minor children, Emma and James Walker." Melissa's attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richardson, stood to present their opening argument. He painted a picture of a devoted mother temporarily separated from her children, who returned to find them alienated and psychologically manipulated by an overbearing grandmother with boundary issues. It was a masterful performance, and if I hadn't known the truth, I might have been convinced myself. But I did know the truth, and in exactly 30 minutes, everyone in that courtroom was going to know it too. When my attorney, Sarah Chen, stood to present our case, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Sarah was a former prosecutor who specialized in child advocacy cases, and she had spent the weekend reviewing every piece of evidence we had assembled. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of grandparent overreach or child manipulation. What we have is a case of child abandonment, charity fraud, and judicial corruption that goes to the very heart of our family court system." Judge Brennan's face went pale, but he maintained his composure. "Counselor, those are very serious allegations. I hope you can substantiate them." Sarah smiled. "We can, Your Honor. We absolutely can." She began with the school records, projecting Emma's artwork on the courtroom screen. "These drawings document a child's emotional journey from abandonment and fear to security and happiness. Emma Walker went from failing grades and behavioral problems to honor roll status in just 8 weeks under Mrs. Whitfield's care. Next came the financial records. While Mrs. Whitfield was spending her own retirement savings to provide for these children's needs, Mrs. Walker was receiving $25,000 per month from the Ashworth Family Foundation for services that had nothing to do with child welfare. I watched Melissa's confident expression begin to crumble as document after document appeared on the screen. Bank records, wire transfers, hotel receipts from the Bahamas, photographs of her on luxury yachts while her children asked their grandmother when Mommy was coming home. "Your Honor, we have recordings of Mrs. Walker discussing her financial arrangement with Richard Ashworth, including conversations about ensuring these children never contradicted the false narrative she was constructing about Mrs. Whitfield." Judge Brennan's hands were visibly shaking now. "Counselor, where did these recordings come from?" "They came from legally authorized surveillance conducted with the full knowledge and consent of David Walker, co-owner of the residence where the recordings were made." Sarah played 30 seconds of audio, just enough to let Melissa's own voice condemn her. The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of her recorded words discussing how to manipulate her children's testimony. "Your Honor, we have 3 months of photographic evidence showing the daily reality of life for Emma and James Walker under their grandmother's care. The screen filled with images of children learning, playing, laughing, growing. Emma reading bedtime stories to James. James proudly displaying his first successful attempt at writing his name. Both children helping in the garden, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of meaningful work and unconditional love. I watched Melissa's attorney frantically shuffling papers, trying to find some way to object to evidence that spoke for itself. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah said, "Your Honor, we call David Walker to testify on behalf of his mother." My son stood up, walked to the witness stand, and looked directly at his wife. "Your Honor, my mother didn't kidnap my children. She saved them. David's voice was steady as he placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. When he looked directly at Melissa, I saw 30 years of marriage dissolving in that single glance. "Mr. Walker," Sarah began, "please tell the court about your children's condition before they went to stay with their grandmother." Emma was having nightmares every night. She would wake up crying, asking if Mommy was going to leave again. James had developed a stutter so severe that his preschool teacher recommended speech therapy. They were both withdrawn, anxious, and clingy. And after 3 months with Mrs. Whitfield, Emma was reading above grade level and had joined the school choir. James's stutter was completely gone, and he was confidently interacting with other children for the first time in his life. They were happy, actually happy. Sarah presented financial documents to David. "Are these your joint credit card statements with your wife?" David examined them carefully. "Yes, but I don't recognize most of these charges. Luxury hotels in Nassau, expensive restaurants, shopping sprees. None of this was authorized by me." "Did your wife discuss these expenses with you?" "She said they were business expenses related to a consulting opportunity she was exploring." I trusted her. Melissa's attorney objected, but Judge Brennan overruled him. I could see sweat beading on the judge's forehead as he realized how much evidence we actually possessed. "Mr. Walker, during the 3 months your children lived with your mother, how often did your wife contact them?" David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 4 times. 4 times in 3 months. Each call lasted less than 5 minutes, and each time she seemed annoyed when the children wanted to tell her about their day. Sarah nodded and returned to our table, where she picked up a thick manila envelope. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence to present." She opened the envelope and withdrew a stack of photographs. These were taken by a private investigator documenting Mrs. Walker's activities in the Bahamas. The first photograph appeared on the screen, and gasps echoed through the courtroom. It showed Melissa on a yacht, clearly intoxicated, in a compromising position with an older man whose face was partially visible. This photograph was taken on April 15th at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At the same time this image was captured, Mrs. Whitfield was helping Emma with her homework and preparing dinner for both children. More photographs followed. Melissa at expensive restaurants, at beach clubs, shopping for designer clothes, always in the company of the same older man who was carefully cropped from most shots but clearly identifiable in others. Your Honor, these images document a pattern of behavior completely inconsistent with Mrs. Walker's claims of being a devoted mother temporarily separated from her children due to circumstances beyond her control. Judge Brennan's face had gone from pale to green. "Counselor, is there more?" "Yes, Your Honor. We call Mrs. Patricia Henderson, principal of Riverside Elementary School. Mrs. Henderson took the stand with the bearing of someone who had spent 30 years advocating for children's welfare. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity and clarity. Emma Walker was a traumatized child when she enrolled in our school. By the time she left our care, she was thriving academically, socially, and emotionally. Mrs. Whitfield attended every parent conference, every school event, every activity that a loving parent would attend. Mrs. Walker attended none. The final blow came when Sarah announced, "Your Honor, we call Emma Walker to testify." Melissa jumped to her feet. "You cannot call my daughter as a witness. She's only 7 years old." Judge Brennan looked trapped. "In chambers, all counsel now." As the lawyers filed into the judge's private office, I remained seated in the courtroom, watching Melissa pace frantically near the defendant's table. She was frantically texting someone, probably Richard Ashworth, and her composure was completely shattered. Marcus Rivera, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, moved to sit beside me. "Florence, it's working perfectly. Judge Brennan is caught between his corruption and the undeniable evidence you've presented. If he rules against you now, it will be so obviously corrupt that even his appeals court connections won't be able to protect him. What happens if he allows Emma to testify? Then a 7-year-old girl tells the truth about the 3 months she spent feeling loved and safe with her grandmother. And this case is over." 20 minutes later, the lawyers returned, and Judge Brennan took the bench looking like a man who had just received a death sentence. "After careful consideration, this court will allow limited testimony from the minor child, with appropriate protections and limitations. Melissa's attorney was furious. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Counselor, everything about this case is irregular. The child will testify. The courtroom fell completely silent as Emma walked toward the witness stand, her small hand clutched in the bailiff's larger one. She wore a simple blue dress, not one of the expensive outfits Melissa preferred for photographs, but a comfortable dress I had bought her for school pictures. When she saw me sitting at the defendant's table, Emma's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that cannot be faked or coached. She waved at me before the bailiff gently guided her to the witness chair. Judge Brennan's voice was unusually gentle. Emma, do you know why you're here today? Yes, sir. Mommy says Grandma Florence did something bad, but I know that's not true. Sarah approached the witness stand carefully. Emma, can you tell us about the time you spent living with your grandmother? It was the best time ever. Grandma Florence made pancakes every morning, and we planted a garden together. She helped me with my reading, and I got really good at it. James learned to ride a bicycle, and Grandma clapped and cheered when he did it. Were you happy living with your grandmother? Emma's voice was clear and confident. I was the happiest I've ever been. I wasn't scared anymore, and James stopped stuttering. We knew Grandma would be there when we woke up and when we came home from school. Emma, during those 3 months, did your mother call to talk to you? The 7-year-old's expression grew sad. Sometimes, but she always seemed mad when I wanted to tell her about my day or show her my pictures. She said she was too busy to talk for very long. Sarah glanced at Melissa, whose face had gone completely white. Emma, when your mother came back, how did you feel? Scared. She was angry about our garden and about James's bicycle. She said Grandma Florence was trying to steal us, but that didn't make sense because Grandma never tried to keep us away from Mommy. She just took care of us when Mommy was gone. The most damaging moment came when Sarah asked, Emma, if you could choose where to live, what would you choose? I would choose to live with Grandma Florence and Daddy and James, but I would want Mommy to visit us sometimes when she's not too busy with her friends. Melissa's attorney stood for cross-examination, but what could he possibly ask a 7-year-old child whose testimony had been so honest, so clear, and so devastating to his client's case? Emma, don't you love your Mommy? Yes, sir. But loving someone and feeling safe with them are different things. Grandma Florence makes me feel safe. It was over. In less than 10 minutes, a 7-year-old girl had destroyed 3 months of careful legal planning with nothing but the truth. Judge Brennan called for a recess, and as Emma stepped down from the witness stand, she ran directly to me. I caught her in my arms, and for a moment, the courtroom disappeared. There was only my granddaughter, holding me tight, whispering, I love you, Grandma Florence, in my ear. When I looked up, I saw Melissa staring at us with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not calculation, but something that looked almost like recognition of what she had lost. But it was too late for regrets. The truth was out, and justice was finally within reach. When court resumed after the recess, Judge Brennan looked like a man trapped between 2 impossible choices: rule in favor of the evidence and destroy his corrupt arrangement with the Ashworth Foundation, or rule against overwhelming proof and face federal investigation for judicial misconduct. Melissa's attorney made one final, desperate attempt. Your Honor, we move to dismiss all financial evidence as irrelevant to the custody matter at hand. Sarah stood immediately. Your Honor, Mrs. Walker's source of income is directly relevant to her fitness as a parent and her motivations for abandoning her children. Judge Brennan's voice was barely audible. Motion denied. I watched Melissa frantically texting again, probably begging Richard Ashworth for instructions on how to salvage this disaster. But there were no instructions that could undo what Emma's testimony had accomplished. Your Honor, Sarah continued, we have one final recording to present to the court. She played the audio of Melissa and Richard Ashworth discussing permanent solutions to the David problem and the benefits of widowed mothers in custody cases. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers as the implications became clear. Melissa jumped to her feet. That recording was obtained illegally. It should be excluded. Your Honor, Sarah replied calmly. The recording was made with the full consent of David Walker in his own home. It documents conspiracy to commit murder and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Judge Brennan's hands were shaking visibly now. I need to see all counsel in chambers, immediately." As the lawyers disappeared into the judge's office, I noticed FBI agents quietly taking positions near all the courtroom exits. Marcus had warned me this would happen. The moment the murder conspiracy was presented as evidence, federal agents would move to secure the scene. 15 minutes later, the lawyers returned, and Judge Brennan took the bench, looking like he had aged 10 years in those few minutes. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, this court finds that Mrs. Melissa Walker has failed to demonstrate that emergency custody is warranted. Furthermore, this court finds substantial evidence that Mrs. Walker abandoned her children for a period of 3 months while pursuing activities incompatible with responsible parenting. Melissa's face went completely white as the judge continued. Custody of Emma and James Walker is hereby awarded to their father, David Walker, with supervised visitation rights for their mother. Mrs. Florence Whitfield is granted unrestricted grandparent visitation rights and is to be commended for her exceptional care of these children during their mother's absence. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and Melissa began to cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of rage and desperation. But her legal problems were just beginning. As court adjourned, FBI agents moved forward with arrest warrants that had been sealed until this moment. Melissa Walker, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit charity fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The woman who had walked into that courtroom confident she could destroy me with lies was now being led away in handcuffs, her expensive attorney already distancing himself from a case that had become a federal criminal matter. Justice had finally arrived, and it was more complete than I had ever dared to hope. The courthouse steps felt like a battlefield after victory, as David and I emerged with Emma and James clinging to our hands. Behind us, FBI agents were still processing the crime scene that had once been a custody hearing. Emma looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that had seen too much for a 7-year-old. "Grandma Florence, does this mean we can go back to your house and work in our garden?" "Yes, sweetheart. We can work in the garden whenever you want." James, who had been unusually quiet during the chaos, suddenly broke free from David's hand and wrapped his arms around my legs. "Mama Florence, I was scared they were going to make you go away." I knelt down to his level, smoothing his hair with the same gesture I had used countless times during those precious 3 months. "Nobody is going to make me go away, James. I'm going to be right here, taking care of you and Emma and Daddy for as long as you need me." David's voice was thick with emotion. "Mom, I owe you an apology that I'll probably spend the rest of my life trying to make up for. I should have seen what Melissa was doing. I should have protected you and the children from her schemes. David, you trusted your wife. That's what good husbands do. The fault lies with the people who betrayed that trust, not with you for giving it." Marcus Rivera approached us with news that completed the picture. "Florence, I thought you should know. Richard Ashworth was arrested at his hotel an hour ago. Judge Brennan was taken into custody at his home. The FBI has seized all records from the Ashworth Family Foundation, and they estimate the total fraud may exceed $20 million. What will happen to Melissa? She's facing federal charges that could result in 25 years in prison. The conspiracy to commit murder charge alone carries a potential life sentence. Her cooperation with the investigation might reduce her time, but she's never going to be in a position to threaten you or these children again." As we walked toward the parking garage, Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma Florence, why did Mommy do all those bad things?" It was a question I had been dreading, but Emma deserved an honest answer appropriate for her age. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups make very bad choices because they want things that seem more important to them than the people they should love most. Your mommy chose money and parties over being your mommy, and that was the worst choice she could have made. But we still love her, right? Even though she made bad choices?" I stopped walking and knelt down so Emma and I were eye to eye. "Yes, sweetheart, we can love someone and still know that they made choices that hurt us. Love doesn't mean we pretend bad things didn't happen, but it also doesn't mean we stop caring about someone completely. Will we ever see her again? I don't know, Emma. That will be up to the courts and up to your mommy. But I do know that you and James are safe now, and that's the most important thing." That evening, we sat around my kitchen table, the same table where Emma had struggled with homework just months ago, the same table where James had learned to write his name in careful, shaky letters. Now they were helping me prepare dinner, chattering about school and friends and plans for the summer garden we would plant together. David watched his children with an expression of wonder, as if he was seeing them clearly for the first time in years. "Mom, they're so different than they were before, so confident and happy." "They're not different, sweetheart. They're just finally free to be themselves." As I tucked Emma and James into their beds that night, their beds in my house, where they would sleep safely for as long as they needed, Emma asked one final question. "Grandma Florence, are you proud of me for telling the truth in court today?" "Emma, I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. You were braver than any grown-up in that courtroom. I was scared, but I knew you would protect me no matter what. Always, sweetheart, always." The nightmare was finally over, but more importantly, the dream of being the grandmother I had always wanted to be was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in my backyard watching Emma and James harvest tomatoes from the garden we had replanted together after the trial. The plants were heavy with fruit, and the sunflowers towered over both children, their faces turned toward the afternoon sun like golden promises of better days ahead. Emma had grown 2 inches and gained the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the adults in your life will always tell you the truth. James spoke in complete sentences without a trace of his old stutter, and he had learned to ride his bicycle without training wheels just last week. David had filed for divorce and was slowly rebuilding his life as a single father. He moved into a house just 3 blocks away from mine, close enough for daily visits but far enough for independence. The children spent weekdays with him and weekends with me, an arrangement that felt natural and healthy for everyone involved. "Grandma Florence," James called from beside the tomato plants. "Look how big this one is." He held up a perfect red tomato, his face glowing with pride at his gardening success. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Should we pick it for dinner tonight?" "Yes, and Emma found 3 more that are ready." The evening news had followed the Ashworth Foundation scandal for months. Richard Ashworth received 15 years in federal prison and forfeited his entire fortune to victim restitution funds. Judge Brennan was sentenced to 12 years and permanently disbarred. The charity fraud had ultimately totaled $28 million, money that was being redistributed to legitimate children's programs across the country. Melissa received 8 years as part of a plea agreement where she testified against her co-conspirators. She would be eligible for supervised visits with Emma and James when she was released, but both children would be adults by then. The woman who had tried to destroy our family to protect her criminal lifestyle was now a cautionary tale in law schools across the nation. "You know what I learned through all of this?" I said to Marcus Rivera during one of our regular check-ins. "The truth really does set you free, but sometimes it takes a while to find its way to the surface. What will you do now, Florence? You've become something of a celebrity in family law circles. I've had 3 different law firms ask me to recommend you as a consultant on grandparent rights cases." I looked out at Emma and James, who were now chasing my neighbor's cat through the garden, while David sat on my back porch reading the newspaper and occasionally laughing at their antics. "I think I'll stick to what I've always done best, Marcus, taking care of my family and making sure children feel safe and loved. Everything else is just paperwork." That night, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she asked the question that had become our nightly ritual. "Grandma Florence, will you tell me the story about the brave grandmother who saved her grandchildren from the bad people?" "I think you already know that story, sweetheart, but I like hearing you tell it. It makes me feel safe." So I told her our story one more time, the story of 3 months when love conquered abandonment, when truth defeated lies, and when an ordinary grandmother discovered that protecting the people you love sometimes requires extraordinary courage. "And they all lived happily ever after?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not ever after, sweetheart, but happily right now, and that's enough." As I turned off the light and closed her door, I reflected on the lesson I had learned through the hardest fight of my life. Justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create by refusing to accept lies as truth, and by never giving up on the people who matter most. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or armies, but with evidence folders and grandmother's love, and the unwavering belief that children deserve to be protected from the adults who would use them as pawns. I had won more than a custody case. I had won the right to be the grandmother I was meant to be, and Emma and James had won the childhood they deserved. In the end, that was justice enough.